and welcome to another edition of the African Transformation Spotlight, brought to you by the African Center for Economic Transformation. We are an African-led, African-driven economic policy think tank based in Ghana with a focus on the entire continent of Africa and connected to the world. My name is Sharmaine Oddoye, Knowledge Manager here at ACET, and I am standing in for your usual host, Belinda Ayamga, our Communications Manager. Today, I am joined by Theophiline Bose-Duker, our Transformation Fellow in Gender. Theophiline is a postdoctoral researcher in the area of development economics with an interest in the broad research areas of family and labor economics. Today, we are discussing gender equality in Africa's economic transformation, where we will explore the impact of her work and bridge the gap between gender equality's potential impact and current progress in Africa. So Theophiline, you joined ACET's new Transformation Fellowship in Gender last year as a development economist. Can you tell us a little bit about your own academic background and then also what your focus has been since you started?
Thank you for the question, Sharmaine. So I was introduced to economics, at least in the formal sense, in secondary school. So I did a bit of economics in secondary school, and then I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Ghana, and I majored in economics there as well. From there, I went to the University of Birmingham in UK to do my master's degree in development economics. And then I took a break for a year, then I went back to do my PhD. And up until then, I thought I was a macroeconomics girl. Like, I was interested in monetary policy, fiscal policy. In fact, my master's dissertation, was on money supply in Ghana and monetary policy. So that was really the route I wanted to take, and my PhD proposal followed that same route. But after a very interesting turn of events, I ended up doing a topic called intra-household resource allocation. Simply, that means that I was trying to answer the question, in a household, what is the share of resources that goes to each person within the household? So if it's a nuclear family, for instance, and you have a mother, the father, and say 2 children, and they earn together as a household a total of, say, 10,000 Ghana cedis, right? How much of that 10,000 Ghana cedis will be consumed by the father? How much will be consumed by the mother? And how much will be consumed by the children? And when you think about that, it's not very obvious that that is a very economic question, right? And I had that same feeling, but I did it anyway, and it proved to be quite an interesting topic. So actually, my interest in gender and family economics started from there. Yes, exactly. So I found, for instance, in Ghana that the males or the fathers get the highest share of resources, followed by the children, surprisingly, and then the women get the least share, which was, I wasn't surprised about the fathers getting the most, but I was definitely surprised that the children were getting more than the mothers, because, the mothers are adults, they have a lot more needs than children, right? But the children somehow are still getting a lot more than the mothers, so that was very interesting for me. And I continued, my PhD was centered around this. So after my PhD, I joined the World Bank as an Africa Fellow. And incidentally, I joined the gender team. And in the gender team, they were also doing intra-household resource allocation. And that was a good surprise, right? So it was a very easy transition into the World Bank. And then from there, we started a project about, the differences between male labor force participation and female labor force participation. What that means is how much of or how many men go into the labor force to work, right, economically, and then women, how many women are able to do that as well. And I think that was when I had my very first aha moment in connecting gender analysis and economic outcomes on the national level, because we found that once within the household, or in generally globally, right, females do about 75% of unpaid care work and domestic work, right, global. And I think the numbers are probably higher in Africa, just because of our traditions and our norms, right? And so if you are a young African woman who lives in Africa, even if you are educated and you have the skills, there is still a certain restriction when you want to join the labor force, because you have to take care of your household, you have to take care of your family members in a way that the men do not have to, right? And so you may have everything, you may have the skills, you may be qualified, but because you don't have the time, right, you end up either not joining the labor force at all, or you find something to do that allows you to balance.
To be flexible.
Exactly, right? So flexibility is key. So if that means I would have to do an informal job, I would rather do an informal job than take a full-blown formal job, right? So that was my first aha moment that, things that happen in the household, they may not seem very economic or obvious in the beginning, but they have huge impacts on national economic outcomes, right? And I'm sure we can all relate to this, right? Because most young African women are faced with this challenge on a daily basis. So, that was my first, oh wow, like this is not really just microeconomics. There's a direct connection to macroeconomic outcomes, economic policy, right? And so from the World Bank, I transitioned into ACET. And ACET took me even deeper on that journey, right? Because in ACET, we do research based on policy, right? The reason we do research is for policy, is for policy uptake. So it's been an amazing journey so far, and I am even more aware now, right, of how the little things that we don't take too seriously that happen within families, that happen within households, can have huge impacts on macroeconomic policy making. And so that's generally my background. And in ACET, like you mentioned, I am part of the Gender Equality Program. And we focus on 3 things, at least for now, right? Because we started the program not too long ago. And the first thing, apart from making sure that our portfolio in ACET is gender mainstreamed, we look at 3 additional things. First, we want to add to the evidence base, okay, with robust research. And one of the ways we are doing that is, of course, our upcoming African Transformation Report. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later, so I won't give too much away. And then the second thing we are doing is to support African governments, right, to move further away from gender-blind or gender-neutral macroeconomic policy to gender-responsive macroeconomic policy. And we are doing that through our country economic transformation outlooks. We call them CETOs for short. And CETOs are actually based off of our African Transformation Index, which we released a few months ago. So if you haven't seen it, please check it out. Okay, it's an amazing resource and you'll find it very useful. And so with the ATI and with the CETOs, we partner with in-house or in-country policy institutions to take a deeper look into the transformation journey of the country. And we do this and make sure that we apply a gender lens, right? So we make sure we are collaborating with the gender experts within those institutes to make sure that in whatever analysis we are doing, we are always looking at the gender perspective as well. And then finally, we want to drive accountability on regional platforms. So in 2020, I believe, the AU declared this decade from 2020 to 2030 as the AU decade for women's economic and financial inclusion. So we are developing a scorecard, right, that would help us to first track progress, right, of each of the countries, each of the African countries. And second, we want to keep our leaders, our governments, we want to, keep them to their word, right? If this is the decade of women's financial inclusion, we want to see that happen. So the aim of the scorecard generally would be to first, catch the attention of the governments and the leaders. It would be to stimulate policy debate, right? And then also galvanize action. And then finally, we want to make sure that we create a platform where countries can learn from each other so that we can drive change at scale, right? So that's what we are doing in ACET at the moment.
Amazing. Thank you, Theophiline. I think this even brings me to my next question.
Okay.
Why is it actually important to mainstream gender in economic research? What purpose does it serve? And what does it actually look like in practice?
That's a good question. So first, let me lay some foundations.
Yes, please.
The first thing I would like to say before I come to answering the question is that the gender equality agenda, it is not a zero-sum game, right? So the fact that we seem to be pushing women empowerment doesn't mean that we are, or men are no longer going to be empowered, right? So it's not a zero-sum game. We can all succeed together. In fact, gender equality is good for both the genders, right? And secondly, it's the right thing to do, right? Women and men are valued equally, right? So it is the right thing to do. So I just wanted to set that base, right? That this, you may hear me say a lot about women, but I'm not saying that because I do not want men to progress. It's the opposite, actually. Exactly. We all want to progress, right? Gender equality is good for all of us. So anyway, so back to the question. So now, women have been disadvantaged for years and years and years, okay? So we have different needs. We are different people. Men are distinctly different from women. So if we want our economic policies to be of high quality, number one, to have an impact or the greatest impact possible, then we can't afford to not take into consideration these differences. We need to take them into consideration. Otherwise, we would be treating everybody as if they were equal. And the truth is, in reality, they are not equal. Okay, so that's what gender mainstreaming is when you talk about, economic policy. It means acknowledging and addressing the differences, right, that we have based on years and years of inequality, right? And the other thing is, if you want to take it a step further, it's not just about just acknowledging the differences and addressing the differences. Now, if we want long-lasting change, we want to address the root causes of those inequalities, or what caused the inequalities in the first place, right?
Yes.
So things like, our norms, our traditions, our cultural norms, the legal frameworks that we have, right? The regulatory frameworks that we have that are biased, right? That do not support gender. Some of them are even gender blind, right? They may actually support one gender against the other. So in those situations, when we try to actually fix those things, when we try to think through how we can fix those things, then we can have lasting change, because then the results just naturally, when you treat gender equality and you treat just, the problems on the surface, it's like just treating the symptoms of a problem without really treating the root cause. And so we definitely need to try to also go down and treat the root cause. Just to bring this more to, to show this in a more practical way. The same example I was giving about, female employment versus male employment. Now, if let's say a government in Africa decided that they wanted to increase employment in Africa or in their country, you could just think, okay, let's take the youth to school, let's get them skilled, let's get them equipped, right? Let's give them internship opportunities, let's give them experience on the job, right? And that would work for men. But for women, you have to think, women have care responsibilities, they have domestic responsibilities. If they are of a certain age, they probably have young children. All those things have to come to play. So for women, you have to take it even further. You have to think, okay, we have to provide a care system, right? We have to do something to take the burden of care off them so that it can be available to work. And we have to try and redistribute the care responsibilities. So maybe we want to enhance paternal leave, things like that, right? So that's what it looks like in practice, where you take the extra step, where you think about, okay, where are the men? Where are the women? What do the men need? what do the women need? What can we do to address what the men need? And what can we do to address what the women need? And what are the root causes? Can we address those root causes? If we can, then we should. Otherwise, our policies would not be effective.
Exactly. I think it's in the detail of the policies.
Exactly.
So what are some of the most effective policies that African governments should actually implement to make sure that these working conditions are improved and we have more career opportunities for women, and then we can also alleviate some of the resource constraints that are in existence?
So there's a lot of research, right, on this, and I could go, I mean, a lot can be said because there's a lot that should be done. But I would like to take this from a certain angle. Now, there are certain things that can be done that are cross-cutting. They cut across sectors, they cut across different parts of the economy. Once you do these things, I feel like we take a very big step, right, ahead when it comes to gender equality. But there are very specific things you can do in specific sectors as well to progress. So I would focus on those things that I think cut across, right? And the first thing I would say that cuts across, and this is because I'm a researcher, right? And I have done a lot of research, and I have faced this problem many, many times. So the first thing I would say is we need to invest in quality data, quality gender data. And this doesn't come up very often in the policy space. But effective policy making is based off of effective research. And effective research cannot be done without data. Data is like foundational. Without data, we don't know the conditions of each gender. We don't know, right? We just don't have the information. So we really need, as governments and as countries, to invest in collecting very high quality gender data. That's the only way. If we are serious about making progress on gender equality, we can't forget about data. Because based off of what? How are we going to make our policies if we don't have good data, right? And so that's one thing that I have said forever. And then the second thing, well, still related to the other thing about gender data is that you need it to also track progress. It's not just about, let's just do the research. How do you know you are making impact? How do you know that your policy is working if you are not collecting data on a continuous basis, right? So it's good. It's not just good to do the research. It's good for research, it's good for implementation, and it's good for monitoring and evaluation. It's key. Without research, without data, I really don't think we would make any progress. So that would be my first thing, right? And I think this cuts across almost everything. And then the second thing I would say would be representation. Women in leadership. Women, we need to engage women in decision-making, places. And I'm not talking just about like political, at the national level, at the sub-national level, in the private sector, in the traditional sector, in our homes, right? Because how can you make decisions about women without women? How can you it's like making decision about men and it's just women sitting at the table talking about it. It really doesn't work, right? It doesn't enable us to target our policies properly. It doesn't enable us to come up with policies that work, because women need to have a voice when their issues are being talked about, right? In the same way, men need to have a voice when their issues are being talked about. The youth need to have a voice when their issues are being talked about, right? So this is just, to me, it's just something that must be done as soon as possible. And thankfully, we do have some countries in Africa who are doing this well. Okay, Rwanda is a shining example. South Africa is an example. Ethiopia is an example, right? Especially when you think about political representation. They have robust legal and institutional frameworks that support this agenda, right? And currently, we are not doing well as a continent, to be honest. Okay, I think as of 2021, I believe only 20% of our cabinets, or only 20%, our cabinets are 20% women. when you talk about like executive top positions like vice president and president, we are just talking about 7%. That's a very low number. We are nowhere close to equality, right? And then when you even go further to talk about how much of the government budget women in government control, we are still talking just around 20%. Very low. How are we going to influence policy if we don't have the investments, we don't have the money, right? So it's crucial to do that. And Ghana, for instance, we are still fighting to pass our affirmative action bill. And I hope we pass it, right? Because we need it. But the next thing, I think we need to take this a step further, right? Because, and this is true in every sector. Like I said, these are cross-cutting issues. If we want to have female leaders, we have to start training female leaders from when they are little, right? From when they are children. Now, I saw this study that made me laugh. I was studying STEM subjects, right? And, girls versus boys in primary school. And very clearly, girls do better, right, than boys in primary school in STEM. And this is very general. This is not just African. This is global. But surprisingly, the boys are just more confident. And the girls just don't think, they don't believe in themselves. They don't think they can do STEM. And they actually do better, right? And it's the most interesting thing. It's like we have this socialization. It's very subtle, but somehow girls are trained to be a little less confident. They feel like they have to be the best of the best to become a leader, right? And the boys are just like, yeah, we can do it. Like, even if they are not really doing this, we can do it. Let's do it. I'm like, wow. So it's those things. And this is something I personally struggle with, right? And I always try to tell myself, and I'm sure you saw it when we were preparing for the interview. I'm like a perfectionist. I'm like, I need to be on top of my game.
All in or nothing.
Exactly. But the truth is, the ideal world would be where, we have female leaders that are just ordinary people, just like we have male leaders who are just ordinary, right? You don't need to be the best of the best of the best. We need to make it such that we all have the values we need, right? We believe that we can, because that's the thing. I feel like that's a problem we have as women, and we can only start that at home and in our educational systems, okay? Please instill confidence in the little girls. Let them know they can be leaders, right? So that's the second thing. The final thing I would say, and this is about elevating human capital, right? And normally we will talk about education and we'll talk about health, maternal mortality rates. Yes, exactly. But the one thing we usually don't talk about is gender-based violence. And it's more prevalent than we would think. In a recent study by Afrobarometer, they found that citizens ranked gender-based violence as the most urgent thing that their governments, needed to tackle. Because, listen, gender-based violence can quickly erase all the progress that we have made. I hear in northern Sierra Leone, girls have to travel maybe 5 or 6 miles to school. And to get to school, they have to have these motorbike riders take them to school. And before they knew it, the motorbike riders were abusing them and impregnating them. The girls won't go to school anymore, right? That's what I mean. It can totally erase all the progress that we have made. And to tackle gender-based violence, I feel it's one thing where we all must get involved. Civil society organizations, governments, the police, of course, religious organizations, the traditional system, we can all make a difference. I think 30% or so of respondents said, oh, it's okay to physically abuse a woman. It's actually justified. And it blows my mind, right? We need to engage in a lot of, how do we call these things? Awareness and education campaigns. Because these are not things that would change just by making a policy. These are deeply ingrained attitudes. So it's something that really does need to be tackled, but it needs to be very well thought of, because we are not just seeking a superficial change. We are seeking to change mindsets.
Exactly.
And that's a bit of some deep work that must be done. So I think if we can tackle these three things, we would be some ways ahead, right? In getting to the other things like labor force participation and things like that.
Yes. Thank you for that. Speaking of high quality data and robust research, I know we're all excited about the upcoming ATR, African Transformation Report. So could you just give us a little bit of insight into what you're investigating, and then what are your hopes for this, the impact of this report on gender equality?
Sure. So the ATR investigates three main things. The first thing it investigates is the impact of gender equality or inequality on economic transformation within the framework of growth with depth, right? And growth with depth is how ACET defines economic transformation. So we are specifically looking at each of the dimensions of depth. So we want to see how gender equality affects diversification of our goods and export competitiveness, the productivity of our labor force, technological advances, and finally human well-being. And then the second thing is we want to look even deeper, right? Look at the root cause of these inequalities. And we think one of the major root causes is power dynamics. And we are looking at different types of power dynamics or different types of power imbalances. The first one we look at is patriarchy, which is not a surprise, right? And we've already talked about women in leadership. The second one we want to look at is class inequality. Now, women are not a homogeneous group, right? And so different women have different experiences of inequality. Not just different experiences, but they have different levels and types of inequality, okay, based on their background. And based off of the research that will come out of these two sections, we will then go on to provide policy recommendations, right, that address both the inequalities themselves and the power dynamics that underlie these inequalities. And hopefully with local evidence, right, we are collaborating with various experts across the continent. So with local evidence from Africa, we believe these policy recommendations would be very relevant for policymakers, they will be relevant for academics, they will be relevant for CSOs, they will be relevant for the private sector. Generally, it will be relevant for even our development partners, I believe, they will be relevant for them. So we are looking forward for this to be a very useful resource for different groups of stakeholders. And we want to show that gender equality and economic transformation actually can support each other and can, reinforce each other, and we can move the agenda of both at the same time. So yes, that's what our ATR is about.
Thank you so much. We're looking forward to the release of the African Transformation Report. So to sum up our conversation, Theophiline, what would you say to other academics, especially female academics, who might consider a fellowship with ACET?
So I would say you should definitely apply, right? If you are interested in the economic transformation of the African continent, if you want to get into policy space, then you really should consider joining the ACET Fellowship. ACET is a world-class organization, okay? It has years and years of experience in this space. And the other thing which is I value so much and I'm sure many young female economists would value, is the work-life balance, okay? It gives you the flexibility to balance both work and domestic responsibilities, care responsibilities, right? And then finally, I would say that the ACET Fellowship is key if you want to grow, right? For me, it's been the one place I have seen myself grow at very tremendous rates. Okay, so a year ago, if you asked me, Theophiline, can you do this interview? I'd be like, no, I don't like public speaking. But here I am, right? I'm doing it and I'm smiling and I'm excited. And it's not just an indicator of how much drive I have personally. It's an indicator of the opportunities I have been afforded at ACET. it's an indicator of the quality mentorship, right, and the investment that people have made in me, especially through the fellowship. So yes, please, if you are a young female economist, please come join ACET.
Thank you so much for joining the Spotlight, Theophiline.
Thank you, Sharmaine.
And thank you to our audiences for joining the African Transformation Spotlight. See you on the next edition.